I'd now like to introduce our next speaker, who's going to talk about what science can tell us about political polarization. Uri Hasson is from Princeton University and the Department of Psychology and Neuroscience Institute at Princeton. Uri?
Hi, I'm very happy to be here. And I have 2 comments before I start. First, I'm going to talk to you a bit about the science of communication and what do we know about the brain. But this is early stages of the research, so as you will see, we know very little. Even what we know about, and it's very little, I won't be able to tell you in 20 minutes. So basically, what I'm going to do is going to be a bit high-level talk. And if you really want to go to the details of the science we are doing, I will be very happy to do it after the talk. So I'm going to start with René Descartes, who in a way was the father of the Western way of thinking. And he was saying this very famous quote, "I think, therefore I am." So in a way, Descartes starts from the own person thinking, and when you start from yourself thinking, other people are something outside of you. And I have to think whether you are here or not, whether I'm dreaming or not, and how do I connect with you. But if you go actually to African philosophy, you will get the different perspective. And they are saying, I am because we are. And in this perspective, I am defined by the other people I'm connected to. And suddenly, the way I'm thinking, the way I'm acting now, is really determined by you influencing upon me. And to give you an example how other people affect the way we are thinking, let me give you one very simple example. Think of all the things you can do with trees. So you can take a tree and you can use it to gather food. You can take trees and build floating devices. You can take trees and cook food and make fire, or build furniture, or create money. Now think what will happen if you will be the only person in the world and you will see a tree. Will you know how to use... Yeah. I do hope that you... I said so far. Okay. So the question is, if you will be living in the world without any other people, will we know all these things? And it's turned out that the more complex your social structures and network, the more things you can do with stuff in the world. So this is a good example how knowledge is gathered by being connected to other brains. So now, if you think about this sentence, I am because we are, there's like a dark side and a light side to it. On the one hand, being connected to other brains create our societies, create our shared background. So in a way, it makes all of us connected together. And this is the reason why I can speak with you now. I grew up in another culture. I grew up in Israel. Now I'm living in the US, speaking in Greece. And the reason that I can talk with all of you, because we all have this shared background. On the other hand, this beautiful sentence also have a seed inside that is a bit dark, right? Because we can be also construed as my group and not your group. And immediately you can see that this we can unite us, but also can divide us. And we saw in many, many different examples of the histories that the notion of we, Muslim versus Christians, liberal versus Republicans, so forth, can create a lot of tensions and can also lead to a lot of conflicts. So the way this talk is going to be constructed, in the first part of the talk, I will present you the neuroscience of what we know about how people communicate with each other and create this we as everyone connected together. And in the second part of the talk, I will talk how this we can also define group, in-group and out-groups, and create also conflicts. So let's start with the we. If we look in on the brain now, we need to look on how two brains or more can be coupled and connected to each other, and also can be uncoupled from each other. So to think about communication, think about the following thing. I have now brain signals in my mind, and now I'm generating sound waves that go into your brains. And what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to take my neural patterns that are related to the way I'm thinking and put it in your brains. And if I will manage to do it, there will be communication. So you can think about what's happening now is that my brain is coupled to your brain to this like sound wave that's going over this like beautiful hole, right? And the way we study your brains while listening, we put you in this fMRI device, and we scan your brains, while either you are listening to real-life stories or speaking a story. And to give you an example of the stimuli we are using, I'm going to play you 20 seconds clip of an experiment of a story of 10 minutes told by a very talented storyteller, Jim O'Grady, in the scanner to our subjects.
So I'm banging out my story, and I know it's good. And then I start to make it better by adding an element of embellishment. Reporters call this making shit up. And they recommend against crossing that line. But I had just seen the line crossed between a high-powered dean and assault with a pastry. And I kind of liked it.
Okay, so now we're looking in the brains of people while they're listening to these like real-life stories. And the way we're analyzing it, we're taking one brain of a listener and use it as a model to predict the responses in another listener. And we can ask whether the responses in one listener are similar to the responses in another listener. Over here on the left, you can see 5 listeners listening to the story. And we start scanning the brain before the story is starting, which is like silent. And during the silence, you can see that the brain response is going up and down, but it's very different from each other. However, immediately as the story starts, something amazing is happening. Suddenly, all the responses
So I'm banging out my story, and I know it's good.
Become
and then
locked.
I start to make it.
And now they are very similar across people, and they go up and down in a very similar way across all listeners. And if we look on the level of similarity of brain responses across all people, we see extensive brain areas that light up. And it's starting from the auditory cortex, but it's spread along the superior temporal gyrus to high-order language areas, and then to frontal and parietal cortex, the two high-level thinking. So in a way, this simple story makes all of you click together and start to respond in a very similar way. We call this neural entrainment. And to explain to you what is neural entrainment, let's start by explaining what is physical entrainment. And then, of course, we want to go and talk about what is social entrainment. So this is physical entrainment. Think about this like 5 metronomes, like the 5 brains of listeners. And before the story starts, when everything is at rest, these metronomes are going to click, but they're going to be clicked out of phase. Now I'm going to come and put them on these 2 cylinders. And now, these 2 cylinders will introduce like a very subtle energy that's traveling through the wood and couple all of them and see what's happening. Okay? Suddenly they are all in phase. And this is exactly this like physical entrainment that I'm doing with my voice. I can make your auditory cortex go down, up to the rhythm of my talk, my voice, right? But now we want to be entrained not only on the sounds, we want to be entrained on the meaning, right? I want you all to think like me because I'm saying high-level stuff. So let's see what's driving this entrainment. So if you look on the brain, this entrainment can come from the acoustic or can come from the meaning. So how do we know which brain areas care about high-level stuff or low-level stuff? So we do the following experiment. We take these 2 brains, and we take the story, and we play it backward. Right? By playing the speech in reverse, you lose all the meaning, but you get the low-level energy going on. So if we look at the brain in these conditions, you can see and represent it like this, like two brain areas clicking in the same time. Early auditory areas will start to be entrained across all listeners and respond in the same way. Now, if we take this story and we take it to words and we scramble the words, now we have a list of words.
An animal, started fact, and right on Pie Man, essentially my story.
And these words start to align early language areas. Now, if you take these words and you build sentences,
and they recommend against crossing that line. It says, "Dear Jim, good story, nice details. Didn't she only know about him through me?"
You see that this alignment is going to high order areas. But only when we use the full coherent story, suddenly we see this alignment spreading to high order frontal areas and back parietal cortex, which really involved in high order thinking and representing the meaning. And we know that these high order areas represent the meaning because we do the following experiments. Okay? We took the English story and translated it into Hasson's. And now we have very different grammatical systems and sounds that represent the same meaning. And if we look on the Hasson listeners and the English listeners, each one listening to their own language, but the story represents the same meaning, you can see that their high order areas become very similar to each other, although these early auditory areas and language areas become very different in their responses. So we know that when you all think the same, this high order area start to respond together. So now we talked only about what's happening in the listener's brain, but I also have a brain, and my brain is talking to your brain. So if we scan the speaker telling the story, and then we look what's happening in the listener's brain, when they listen, we see this amazing thing. We take the speaker brain, and we use it as a model to see whether we can predict the responses in the listener's brain. And we see that during communication, the brain of the listeners becomes similar to the brain of the speaker. So in a way, what you can think what I'm doing now, I'm trying to make your brain similar to mine. Okay? And I know that it's tough because I'm talking about something you know very little about. I have a very heavy accent, so it's difficult to understand what I'm saying. But I know that if you now really get me, your brain responses start to be similar to my brain responses. And if you completely at lost, we have a very different responses. And I also know that the more similar your brain responses, the better you understand me. So far we talked about how the similarities across brain responses can really connect us and allow us to communicate with each other. So now let's move to the other part of the in-group and out-group effects. And we will do this with a very simple experiment. Very, very simple. We took a story by J.D. Salinger. And this story is very delicate and written in an ambiguous way. So the story is going as follows. A husband lost track of his wife in a party. He go back home by himself, and he calling his best friend in the middle of the night to ask about her whereabouts. Next to the best friend at night, there is a mysterious woman that her identity is unknown to the readers. So we, as a good scientist, will ruin the ambiguity, and we'll tell half of the audience over here, let's say this half, that the wife have an affair, and she is lying next to the best friend. Okay? To the other group, to the other half of the theater, we say the following. We say, the husband is crazy jealous, the wife is faithful, and this poor friend wants to go to bed with his girlfriend and leave this conversation. Okay? So now you have two different interpretations, and this happened before the story starts, and now you were all exposed to the same 15-minute story. And of course, I'm not going to expose you to this 15-minute story, but I will give you again 20-second example.
Did you happen to notice when Joni was leaving? Did you happen to notice if she left with the Ellenbogans, by any chance? The gray-haired man looked left again. but high this time, away from the girl, who was now watching him rather like a young, blue-eyed Irish policeman. No, I didn't, Arthur. Didn't she leave with you? No, Christ. You didn't see her leave at all, then? Well, no. As a matter of fact, I didn't, Arthur.
Okay, so let's look for a moment what's going on over here. Both groups in the theater understood the questions, right? So if I'm going to ask you, all of you, why is Arthur, the husband, want to come to visit his friend Lee? You will all know that because he's being anxious, right? So you will all say, of course, he's being anxious, right? But if you're looking at the response of the friend when the husband wants to come, and you ask, why does he want to say no? This part will say, because he doesn't want to be caught. This part will say, because he is tired, right? So although we understand, everyone understands the situation in the context, there is also interpretation going on. Is lying or is tired? Is an annoying guy or is he really a good friend, right? So when you look on the brain of the people listening to this story, we see something amazing. In these other areas that care about the meaning, your responses on this part of the audience are going to be very similar and very different than this part of the audience. So in a way, by looking on your brains, if the chance level is 50%, I can be about 85% confident what is your interpretation. By only give you one sentence that makes this part more similar than this part. So what's going on over there? First, you need to understand that this is an arbitrary assignment, right? I can make your brain more similar by give you this piece of information. The wife have an affair. Or I can give you a different information and it will change your brain responses. So in a way, I can make each one of you belong to the other group, okay? And this one sentence was enough to make all of you more similar and different than the other group. So it's a very powerful effect, right? Now you can think about this knowledge that I gave you as a prior filter. You all listen to the same story, but you have a different filter playing around. So one of you were thinking, oh, he's lying, the other one thinking, oh, the other guy is really annoying. So this knowledge that you bring going to change the way you process the incoming input. Objectivity is not the right word anymore, right? Because we all have prior knowledge that's going to affect the way we understand reality, right? And now you can ask, which statement is really true? She have an affair or he is crazy, right? There is reality outside, but we never saw. And the way we believe about things is going to affect the way we process it. So it's really important to know what are the facts, right? That will really change the conversation. And in this particular case, it's way easier. But if you think about the debate that we had before, the question becomes way harder. Is immigration good for economy or bad for economy, right? Now the questions are harder. And now when we go to these complicated questions at the end, you should ask, from where do I gather the information? From where do I gather these like filters that I imposed on the reality, right? And if you have one group that only listening to Fox News and another group that only listening to the New York Times, and this is not like one sentence before a story starts. This is a prior that is built day by day for years. Now you can see how we're going to be even more separate in our responses. So if we go back to our beginning, okay? On the one hand, it's good that we can really be polarized. I don't think we all want to think the same. So by allowing this in-group and out-group effects, we can really build society and diversity and multicultural, multi-opinions world. Because the questions are hard, and we know that there is no one answer that's going to fit all. But on the other hand, I think this is the point of these discussions today, we also all feel that something is changing. We feel that there is like a divide now. We feel that we start to be connected. We feel that we are living now in our echo chambers, right? We don't listen to the other side. And you also feel that there are forces at play that try to intensify this divide. You feel that there are forces in play that like it for us not to listen to each other, not to have common ground. And without this common ground, we're going to split further and further and go to very dark places, because we know that once you think that the outgroup is different than you and is against you, bad things happen. So the question is not how we're going to remove opinions. I think the questions, and maybe now this is like my scientist art, I'm thinking it's fine to have different opinions, but can we come with a mechanism that decide about the truth, about the facts? And I think the problem now that I see more and more is that we live in an alternative facts universe. In a way, we don't care about the facts. We care about our voices. And that increases the divide. So the question is whether we can have a society in which you have many opinions, many in-group and out-group, and you can belong to many different groups at the same time, have many identities, but still have a common ground, a third common ground, in which we have a mechanism in which we can decide about what is right, what is wrong, what is true, and what is not. Thank you.
Really fascinating. Thank you so much. How interesting that J.D. Salinger story, and just was she having an affair or not, and how we saw that differently. We've talked this morning about why people migrate. We've talked about how the brain works and hears the same thing differently. I think probably all of us have at one time or another said, things weren't so polarized when I was growing up. I remember when I was a kid, X, Y, or Z. So our next panel is going to talk about why is there an increase in polarization? Why do we all feel that things are different today than things were when we were children, or at least younger? Our panel discussion is going to be led by Ron Daniels, who's the president of Johns Hopkins University, and his panelists will be Rachel Brown, the executive director of OverZero, Uri, again, who is still from Princeton, and he's still from the Department of Psychology and Neuroscience, and Matt Rogerson, who's the head of public policy for Guardian News in the UK. So, Ron, I'm going to turn it over to you.